Welcome to Gen Authentic, where we believe that everything you do takes work, whether it's your job, your relationships, your hobbies, and even self-love. That all takes work, and we're here to challenge you to do that work more authentically. I was first introduced with today's guest by one of the first people that have ever been on my show. For those OG listeners out there, you might remember Ari, the multi-hyphenated angel that shared their experiences of finding alignment in all areas of their life. And when I reached out to Ari, it was because I was looking for a sound partner, not a podcast agency. And I wanted to find somebody who really cared about my story and the messaging from my guest. And enter Robi. We began our working relationship just about 6 months ago, and I can confidently say that I'm a better speaker, better podcaster, and a better partner thanks to their belief and support in me. I knew Robi was the perfect person for me when they shared that the reason that they got into sound engineering is because they struggled with their voice being heard when recording, and they never wanted other individuals to ever feel that way. Not only has Robi helped my voice be heard, but they have also given me the confidence to raise it even when it's shaking. So without further ado, I am honored to share this incredible spirit with you all today as we discuss the power of aligning your passions with who you are and what you do authentically. Robi, let's tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you. That was a really kind intro. And I appreciate you taking time to have me on your show. I'm Robi, or Rob or Robin, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm a transgender queer artist currently living in Berlin, and I usually oversimplify what I do by saying that I'm a sound and media artist, but that kind of encompasses a lot for me. So from, podcast sound to experiential sound, experimental composition, digital arts. I've done film and game sound design and composing, sound installations. But I think like the thing that really ties everything together for me is storytelling and poetry and thinking about the affective power of using one's voice and speaking with the body and also being witnessed as generative acts of healing and connection. So the voice plays a major role in things that I do, and especially storytelling. Oh, and I'm also an educator.
Yeah, just throwing that one in at the end, right?
I'm the extended reality workshop leader at the Weizensee University of the Arts in Berlin.
I love that. And I definitely want us to talk more about that because I've been seeing some of the stuff that you're creating on Instagram, and it is really cool to see how that comes together and just
Thanks.
Be a different, umbrella of like, or, I guess like tier of the art that you do. And just speaking of the voice, even as you were saying that, your voice comes across as a storyteller, almost like you could definitely be reading some Audible books because I'm just sitting there listening and loving it. So I think it's great. So
Thank
Berlin,
you.
But no European accent. So tell me, like, how did you get over to Berlin?
Yeah, I'm originally from Florida, and I was born and raised in Florida. And I came over to Berlin maybe 4.5 years ago. I moved here to be closer to a person at the time and also to attend grad school. So I ended up at the University of Arts Berlin and just graduated last year with my master's in, it sounds like a wizarding degree, but sound studies and sonic arts.
I love it. And then now you're back teaching there.
I'm teaching at a different art university in Berlin.
Different
in
one.
Weizensee.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit smaller, but I think that their programming is really great. Because it's smaller, it's a lot more attuned to individuals. And yeah, it's just easier to work smaller machines sometimes, especially in bureaucracies like universities. So I think that it really benefits the students.
Absolutely. Going
I went to
from
the big one.
Yeah, I was going to say, going from like the major, university there, it's got to be the equivalent of like state schools, here in the U.S. and just having that mentality of it. So, and I can definitely understand having that smaller group, being someone who works in corporate America, going from a giant conglomerate of like multiple corporations within one to now supporting the group that I do now. And we don't even use the C word in our group that we are in now.
Yeah.
Trying to change
it's a different
that.
atmosphere.
It is. And the
Yeah.
people talk and care differently in that
Yeah.
atmosphere. So as an educator, you have that opportunity to reach the students, especially in such a creative space, right? This is not math that the math is math, right? This is very creative. And so having that autonomy with your students and having that one-on-one time with them really, has to be super beneficial for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me too. I mean, we're developing a different intimacy and trust than something that would happen on a larger scale when there's more people coming in all the time, And I've just found that the university system here is very different from the one in the US. And that was also another reason why I came to Berlin, because the universities in Germany are much more affordable. And I felt like being an artist in Florida, for me, was unsustainable. I gave it a solid decade of a shot, I really hustled. I was part of, that kind of backbreaking hustle culture. I would say I still am, but I'm actually reaping some rewards now. And I was not before. So going to a school in which I didn't accrue so much debt was really important to me, because I also looked at, for example, NYU has a sound program, but that's about $60,000 a year. And I just couldn't imagine graduating with that much debt and then going into such an unpredictable career like being an artist,
It almost seems like a joke that they can charge that, like knowing how hard the industry is and how unstable. It literally just seems like a joke to me at that. Our entire
absolutely.
Education system as a whole, especially in Florida, but our entire education system as a whole, here is just a struggle, especially hearing more about how it is in other countries like that.
Yeah. And I also recently had a conversation with an educator in Florida and was commenting on the really stark social differences too. Like, for example, my university, I'm very privileged to work there, and because there's so much social freedom here, and there is like a trans flag flying right now, and multiple LGBTQIA flags, and stickers on bathrooms that say "No toilets for transphobes." So it's really a space that's like
I love that.
It's really radical, Yes. And the students brought a petition to me. And I had to double check with the faculty if it was okay to put my name on it, and they were like, why wouldn't it be okay for you to sign this? And I was like, will I lose my job? And they were like, no, we actually were just recently talking, and the students aren't radical enough these days, So it's very different.
I love that. I love that. You kind of have to, shake off what is the term? The expat, right? Expatriate. You kind of have to shake off, that mentality that it has on you, especially in this realm of education and being in another country. Yeah. So do you speak German?
I understand really well and can read really well, and I can have very basic conversations, but it's in flux always because I really wasn't focused on it during my master's degree, and my degree was in English. So it hasn't been my main focus.
That's amazing. I mean, and obviously you'd learn more about the reading and hearing of it just being, there in the culture, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking, it's always such a different thing.
It's so hard. And they speak pretty great English here, so immediately people switch to English with me.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's funny to even think, because German is such a harsh and hard language. So with how melodic your voice is, it's so hard to even think, that it would be like this curt kind of thing. So
I've had some very embarrassing slip ups.
Yeah.
Because I tend to change words so that so that they suit my palate. And
yes.
That's inappropriate in another language.
Yes. That's
so I've said some really shocking things to people before.
I love that. That is awesome.
I'll tell you off air sometimes. There we go. They're very embarrassing. Yeah. Some unintentionally sexual too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh my God. That's usually what it is. And I'm like, oh my God, I just said that.
Yeah. You wouldn't believe what I asked the janitor for.
Okay. I cannot wait for that one. That'll definitely have to be a spill the tea session. So yeah. I love it. So obviously you said, you're an artist for a decade in Florida. You tried that. What first got you interested in digital art, sound art, what did that path look like for you?
Well, in Florida, in my other life, I was a musician, I was a singer, I was a soprano, the vocal type, not the family. And I had many bands and musical projects. I was a touring and session musician for a few years. I think I've played hundreds of gigs, maybe more. I was a session singer, which means that other musical artists would hire me to perform on their albums. So I played on Radical Faces album, Rickolas, Chesky, lots of others. And I also had my own projects and bands, the Little Books, For Families, Gabe Darling. So I come from a very musical background, and only recently, I would say, recently, the last 10 years, have been getting into the more technical side of things. But I've always dabbled in recording. Even when I was a kid in middle school and high school, I would record myself and my friends on my dad's Tascam 4-track recorder. But of course, I didn't know anything about mic placement or mixing, and I don't think I really cared. I was just recording songs about like smelly socks and microwave radiation and stuff like that. So it wasn't until a bit later that I became more and more interested in the ins and outs of studios because, as you said earlier, I never really felt heard in these spaces when I was recording for myself and others. I felt often like an accessory or just the pretty voice that was brought in, even when it was my record. No one seemed to really listen to me or to consider my creative thoughts and ideas. And I think like recording studios traditionally are very masculine. They're also very technical spaces, so there are all these kind of gatekeeping that happens. And the engineers and producers are typically men. So at some point, I just decided that I didn't want my voice to be filtered through men any longer. And
preach.
Yeah. And so that's when I started looking into options. Yeah. Don't filter my voice.
Yes.
So that's when I decided, like, I just want to learn how to do this. And I was surrounded by so many talented men in Jacksonville who I was in bands with and performed with, like my friend Rick. He does everything. He wears all the hats and writes and records and performs and mixes, and he's always done that, and he's very prolific. And so I knew what was possible. And I just wanted to be able to do that for myself. And so I went to the recording workshop in Ohio, which is a fabulous program. I can only recommend it. Since then have just continued learning and developing and dabbling in every little niche of sound, pretty much, trying things out.
I love that. That's such a good depiction of the journey and what that was like for you. And you're right, because those powerhouse voices where, traditionally, like if you are a female, identify as female, even then soprano voice, is a struggle to get recognized. And so, but you hear those power, like my dad is a big American Idol person. And so then, those powerhouse people that sound booms through. But at times the soprano or those higher notes can almost be piercing if it's not sound engineered correctly. If the mic isn't set up correctly. And so, it's again interesting that because it was different, people weren't learning how to highlight the beauty of that sound, because now that there are amazing ways to between mic placement and how you do all your magic stuff behind the scenes that you can really make that higher pitch and tone just resonate in your soul, just as if it was Aretha Franklin hitting those low notes, And so, again, it's just interesting to think that in all things, if we aren't afraid of what's different, we aren't afraid of what's new, and we don't say, oh, well, it's never been done before. That kind of voice has never been highlighted before, so we're not going to do it. You really have to be brave and pioneer to do that. So do you think that the industry has changed at all in the last, as there is more inclusivity in the arts and things like that? Have you seen a change in the industry with sound and technology recognizing voices differently?
I've certainly seen more women and queer people in studios, but I would still say that the power and money typically goes into the male-dominated studios. Those are the ones that receive a lot of funding and a lot of traffic. But I do see more marginalized people entering the space, claiming space, and learning how to do things, and also creating new spaces, which I think is really important. Like, maybe we don't want a seat at that table. Maybe we want to build our own, or maybe maybe it's not even a table that we want. Like, we're going to go do this other thing, which is a really important part of my practice and thinking, is world building and imagining other potentials and ways of being. And I think that marginalized communities especially are very talented at this and finding other ways of gaining access or creating new access points. And so I have noticed that. And there are a lot more like women and queer collectives in sound. And bizarrely, I don't know how much things correlate with my own knowledge progression, and, for example, my transition. But the more masculine I got, the more technical jobs I have been receiving. And I think a lot of people view me as a very technical person, and I've never really viewed myself that way. I, like, for sure with sound, now I'm very competent, but with other certain technical things, I'm not, but people listen to me. And this is a very stark contrast to when I was pre-transition. And I literally would speak in studio spaces and no one would hear me. And this even happened at the recording school, a place that I felt very empowered and that I was the top student, and that is one of the happiest time blocks of my life. There was a moment when we were in the studio and we were troubleshooting an issue, and I said my idea to fix the problem 5 or 6 times. No one heard me, and then except the guy next to me, who finally repeated what I said. And then they were like, "Oh my God, that's a great idea, Jeff." and then we went in to the recording space, into like the live room to do this idea. And he was like, "I'm sorry, I just couldn't take it anymore. Like, I couldn't listen to you say that anymore." And I was like, "Well, next time you should give credit."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah." And we were live the whole time too. Which means that the monitoring room could hear us, the whole class could hear us, and they could all hear how upset and frustrated I was. And then we walked back in and they were like, "Oh my God, we're so sorry. We didn't hear you." And it was just, really stark contrast to what I experience now, which is people look to me. And of course that was earlier in my career, but also I think that sexism, misogyny still exist in these spaces, of course,
It does. And, I was speaking to my friend the other day about how often women or people who present as women they always get judged on their tone. Your tone is too short. Your tone is too curt. There's all these things about your tone. And my friend and I were discussing about that just deep-rooted misogyny, because I am not supposed to be definitive or direct, or to be meek. And so when I do want my voice heard, when I'm tired of sitting in the room and repeating myself 3 times, and then the man next to me gets the credit, when I do speak up so they can hear me, that's then a tone. Yeah. And it's just, it's so frustrating and just a very real prevalent thing, today. It's not over. And like you said, still, especially men with money and power, they are going to continue to not hear our voices.
Yeah. yeah, and I think that that's it just solidified my reason for being there, because my whole concept behind going to this program was that I am determined to take the reins on my own projects and voice, and to not relinquish my voice and my creative ideas anymore. I'm not going to be in spaces where I'm not valued, and I'm not going to go to studios in which I'm just an accessory. And my idea was also like, I want to create spaces in which other marginalized people, women, queer people, and also men feel comfortable to perform and to ask questions and to try new things and to learn, and that they feel really confident in their voice with me. And that was always something that I wanted to, a kind of space that I wanted to foster, and to just like demystify the process and make it accessible,
I love it. I love you so much. I just melt as you share this.
Thanks.
So, I mean, the biggest thing, I can tell is you're passionate about this, right? You're passionate about creating a safe space for marginalized individuals, for people that have felt that there wasn't space for them or they weren't heard. So, what would your suggestion be, and what would your advice be to our listeners that are maybe struggling with finding purpose behind their passion?
I would say, don't wait to be yourself, and don't be bashful about what sparks excitement for you, but turn in that direction and then don't look back. And don't be worried about things not all coming together overnight, but just begin moving unapologetically into yourself and leaning into your curiosities. And do this especially if they seem niche and weird, or if there's no one who looks like you doing it. Because eventually all those small steps that you're taking will make a really massive difference. And you'll look back in a few years and you won't even be in the same league.
And do you think that because you were able to lean into yourself artistically, that's what kind of allowed you to have that security to transition, to, advocate for yourself? Like, do you think that because you tried all those different things, was that really a foundation that allowed you to do these other big, like moving across the country or world? I mean, all of that stuff. Would you like give credit to the fact that you leaned into who you were and you weren't trying to be someone else anymore?
Yeah, I think that they're all in conversation with each other internally. And I believe that trans people are creators, and that we are constructing realities, that we're redefining pleasure and joy and our relational dynamics and what it is to become as individuals. We're constantly remapping relationships and language and life patterns and time. Like we're shapers of time. And so I think that this definitely plays a really strong role in the way that I approach all of my life and what I deem as possible or impossible. And also my artwork, in which I particularly enjoy exploring mediums like virtual reality or digital arts, which conceptually support world building. Because in these spaces, I don't have to bring in any of the isms, and I can have a world which exists outside of capitalism or goals or tasks, task-oriented things, or accumulation or whatever. So I can build spaces that are just for listening or just for reflection, which is a really liberating experience, obviously. Like, listening is a really radical act, I think.
Wow. Listening is a radical act. Listening to yourself, being open to others.
Yeah.
That is, you gave me so many like little Robiisms today. I love it. I love it. Don't filter my voice. Listening is radical.
Yeah. I think being vulnerable and sharing stories is also radical. of course, but listening, when we listen, we really allow for a new depth of intimacy. And when we have this intimacy with others, then there's a shared resonance which occurs between the two or the many or the audience. And resonance is really a binding agent for relationships. And it's through resonance that we see our reflection in one another. And that reflection is what creates empathy and understanding and safety and compassion. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible to feel heard, right? So, yeah, I'm always seeking this. How can we have this resonance? And how can I empower others and have agency over voice? Yeah, it's just something that I'm really passionate about and grateful that I can provide for myself and for others.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Just, oh my gosh. So that's to hear somebody and to listen to them, two very different things.
Yeah.
And to be listened to and taken in as truth, is just a very unique feeling.
Yeah.
And I think it allows you to be more vulnerable, right? Because when you're listened to, you will share more.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
So Robi, if the listeners want to find more of your art, connect with you, what does that look like for them? Where can they find you?
They can find me online. I have a website, robinrutenberg.com. I'm on Instagram as Gabe Darling, which is a performance moniker, but you would also find me if you typed in Robin Rutenberg. Yeah, those are the two places, I think.
I love that. I know it's funny because I follow you on Insta and I was like, I wonder what this Gabe Darling is. And then you said it was one of your band names and I was like, now that all connects.
Yeah. Gabe Darling is a Southern heartthrob that writes hits like Big Truck Little Lady.
Oh my God, I fucking
went
love
down on Georgia.
Oh hell yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. See, we're gonna have to do a part 2 where we go through all your artist personas. Because that Floridian came right out of you.
It's a trans feminist performance. What did I call it? Fag fiction performance. So Gabe is a very special character who shares stories about growing up queer in Florida.
Oh, I love Gabe Darling. I love it. I'm here for it. Awesome. Well, Robi, thank you so much, not only for sharing your story today, talking about your passions, talking about how you're one of the people who was able to turn that passion into a career and now educator to help inspire that passion in others. And as I share with you all the time, thank you so much for helping me believe in myself, listening to my episodes, listening to the way you bring my stories to life has made this podcast extremely, extremely rewarding for me. And a therapy I didn't know I needed. And it's a big thanks to you because I sound like somebody who I want to listen to now. And the big part of that is your confidence in me. And so I just want to thank you for being on the show and doing everything you do to make Gen authentic as it can be, and how much hard work you put into sharing the stories of mine and others. And I would have been remiss to not bring you on and have you share your story with the listeners so they can know the magic behind the sound of Gen authentic. So I didn't know I was going to cry at the end of this episode.
It's a real joy and a real pleasure
to
do this with you.
The best. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. And Robi, thank you for being one of the voices of a generation working more authentically through life. Thank you for listening to another episode of Gen Authentic. If something in today's episode resonated with you, share it with a friend. If you hated it, share it with an enemy. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at Stef Authentically on Instagram and TikTok. Until next time, thank you for being the voices of a generation working more authentically through life.